ignition switches. On. RPM switches. Set. TD switches. Normal. Doors and hatches. Closed. Light out. Strobe light. On. Restart check is complete. Clear left. Engineers, start number 2. Starting 2. Wind 310, Pilot Project Podcast. Clear takeoff. Runway 31 left.
All right, we're ready for departure here at the Pilot Project Podcast, the best source for stories and advice from the pilots of the RCAF. I'm your host, Brian Morrison. With me today is my good friend, Fred Penguin Roy. Fred, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Brian. It's great seeing you after all these years, man.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go over Fred's bio. Fred received his pilot wings in 2017 and later graduated from his fighter pilot course in Cold Lake in 2022. He was then posted to 433 Tactical Fighter Squadron in Bagotville, Quebec, flying the CF-188 Hornet. Part of Fred's fighter lead-in training included going to Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program, or NJEPT, at Shepherd Air Force Base, Texas, flying the T-38C Talon. After completing his training in 2022 on the CF-18, he filled subsequent roles at his squadron as a combat-ready wingman and training officer. During that time, Fred has conducted domestic NORAD operations and flown in support of a few international exercises in Europe and the United States. So Fred, having worked with your dad, I have a potential idea of the answer, but where did aviation start for you?
Yeah, that's right, Brian. You know very well that my father was a pilot in the Air Force, still is a pilot in the RCAF. He flew the CP-140 Aurora in Greenwood, and he also did a bit of work for a few years as a civilian pilot, airline pilot. So for me, I was actually born in Moose Jaw while my dad was doing his Phase 2 flight training back in 1996 in Moose Jaw on the CT-114 Tudor. So I've been right from birth kind of around aviation and especially military aviation. Grew up, watching my dad go to work in his flight suit every day. And pretty much for as long as I can remember, I've been wanting to be an Air Force pilot.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's another kind of case of it being in your blood, really.
Yeah, exactly. In my blood. And for me, there was no other option, really. It was kind of become a pilot in the Air Force, and, anything else was just a backup plan.
Yeah. We're going to get into your training in a moment, but did you find that added a layer of pressure, or were you were good to go, basically?
It definitely added a layer of pressure, but also added a layer of motivation. I mean, I knew that my dad was super, super proud of me for following his footsteps, but I also knew that, he would still love me if I did something else, decided to do something else. So
yeah, of course.
I think it was just self-induced pressure, trying to make dad proud, make mom proud, but for me, it was motivation. I kind of took that as fuel.
Yeah.
To add to the fire.
Yeah. I know another guy that I know in the fighter world was also, his dad was a fighter pilot, and it certainly added some pressure for him during training. So I know that can happen sometimes, but like you say, it can also add some motivation. So
yeah, motivation. And also my dad was really a good source of knowledge, and I could call him anytime and ask him questions, what did you find difficult in this part of your training? And he always could give me a good answer, which was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. How did you find your flight training experience in the forces?
Yeah, so my flight training was awesome, especially the highlight of my training program through the Royal Canadian Air Force training was the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program in Texas, NJEP as it's commonly called, working with, over 10 different NATO countries, NATO partners, in Texas, flying the T-38 Talon. And I think that was a really cool part of my training, and definitely the highlight.
Yeah, I knew a few guys who did the NJET program, and it seemed like a lot of fun, but also super high pressure, super high intensity. Like, how did you find that in comparison to our flight training?
It's a very different way of learning. The U.S. system is, there's a lot of pilots that go through the program, and since the 1960s, not one NJET course has graduated late. They've always been on time. So it is a bit of a meat grinder. Like, a lot of pilots have to get through this program per year from all the different countries, including Canada, the US, Norway, the UK, Germans. There's a whole bunch of us. So the training was definitely very procedure focused.
Mm-hmm.
You had to know your stuff and you had to execute it well every day. And other differences would be, in the Canadian Air Force system, we kind of, if we want to brief with our instructor, we go into a closed room, close the door, and, it's kind of more of a one-on-one brief/debrief session. Whereas with the U.S. Air Force, you're in a room with everybody else. You and your instructor are sitting like at his desk, but like all your student partners, your teammates are sitting there studying on their own, and they can listen to your brief, your debrief. So if you fail the flight and your instructor's like giving you a bit of a oh, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. Well, all your buddies are listening to that. And so definitely adds a lot of pressure and a lot of stress.
Yeah, there's no secrets.
No, there's no secrets. Yeah, everything's out there.
How did you like flying the Talon? How was that as an aircraft?
Talon was really cool. I mean, it's a super difficult jet to fly. Like there's been a lot of accidents since it started flying. I think it was in the 50s that they started flying the Talon. So it's a really old jet, but they've upgraded over the years, the engines, all the avionics in there. So it really was like flying a little fighter jet. The F5, in fact, was based off the T-38. So
yeah, isn't it almost the same, but with afterburners?
Yeah, with afterburners and different wings, I believe.
Okay.
The thing really is a little lawn dart, like a little fighter jet. It was really cool.
Is it the Talon that they used in the first Top Gun movie for the MiGs?
That was F5s. Yeah,
oh, okay. Okay, so
very close.
Yeah. So something really interesting about your flight training is you also were in the Seneca program, which is now discontinued. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, I joined in 2014 under a program called the Seneca COTP program. What it entitled pretty much was 4 years to get a degree from Seneca College in Toronto, as well as your RCF pilot's wings, either in Moose Jaw and Portage. So for the first 4 years of the program, we would bounce back between our degree, our school in Markham, Ontario, and then all the flight training done either in Portage la Prairie or in Moose Jaw for our wings. So in 4 years, we could get fully trained from, an 18-year-old kid to a fully winged captain ready to go onto his operational training unit and flying.
How did you find that bouncing back and forth between Toronto and the prairies? Like, was it kind of tough because you were never in one spot for a long time, or?
Yeah, it definitely was difficult. A lot of sacrifices were made, obviously, but for me, it was my dream. It was my goal to get to where I'm at. So I did everything I had to do. So Toronto was a really cool city. Obviously, we were paid to go to school in Toronto as second lieutenants. Not a lot of people can say they've done that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then obviously the flight training through the Air Force in Moose Jaw and Portage was super intense. So bouncing back and forth between both was definitely difficult, but super rewarding at the end, obviously.
Yeah. So you're going through your Seneca program, you're going back and forth. Obviously the dream is to become an F-18 pilot. You finally get selected F-18s. What was that like?
Yeah, so actually, funny story, when I finished phase 3, was selected jets, was super happy about that. Obviously, that was my dream from the very get-go as a kid, was to become a fighter pilot. After seeing Top Gun and watching the F-18 demo at the air shows, that was really kind of what I was aiming for. So when I got selected for jets, went on to the phase 4 training in Moose Jaw on the CT-155 Hawk. Once I finished that, went back to Toronto to do my last 3 semesters of school. And while I was there was a small period of time there, a few years, where there was a big backlog for fighter pilots training through Cold Lake.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I got rounded up with me and my 2 other classmates by our course director, if you will, in Toronto. And she said, listen, guys, there's no easy way to put this. There's too big of a backlog in Cold Lake right now. So we're giving you the option. Either you are going to switch from going fighters to another community, so multi-engine or helicopter, or you go to Moose Jaw, become an instructor on the Harvard or the Hawk, and just wait it out till you can go fighters.
Yeah.
So the 2 other guys I was with, they said, they had girlfriends and they said, okay, we're just going to make the switch. They both switched to multi-engine.
Yeah.
I was young. I was kind of still really aiming for the goal of being a fighter pilot. So I said, sure, I'll go be an instructor in Moose Jaw and just wait out being able to go to Cold Lake for my training.
Yeah.
And then I actually got a posting message to Moose Jaw as an instructor. And about a month before I headed out, I got a phone call from Major Public Cover.
Okay.
You probably know him from the Aurora days.
Yep.
And he said, Fred, would you like to go to Texas? And I was like, what? Like NJEP? He's like, yeah. Do you want to go to NJEP? And you can go right to the Hornet after that. Obviously, like instant yes. Absolutely. Like I was thrilled. So I managed to, there's always ways in life sometimes that you think that there's a barrier that you can't really get over, but there's always a way at the end of the day that you can get to your goal. So yeah, I was really lucky to be able to go to NJEP, do that training, and then move on to the F-18 after that.
So that's a bit of an emotional roller coaster, hey?
Yeah, really.
It shows though how much you wanted that, because it is tough. It's tough when you think you've got your goal and then roadblocks start appearing, and maybe you end up doing something that you didn't expect to be doing along the way, because it would have been probably a good 3-4 year stint in Moose Jaw, right? It's not like you would have just been there for a year waiting. Like it probably would have been a full tour, I'm guessing, of instructing.
Exactly. It would have been a while. And it just goes to show that there's a lot of things in life, and especially in the Canadian Armed Forces, where you don't have much say on, or you don't have much control on. But if you keep your head down, keep working at it, and you really show that you want something, there's always kind of a way at the end that you'll be able to make it there. Yeah, for me, I was really lucky. Obviously it's timing as well. It's being in the right place at the right time, but I was really lucky to be able to go through that back way instead of being an instructor and go right onto the F-18.
Yeah. So what exactly does the F-18 do? It's Canada's only fighter aircraft, so I imagine you folks have a wide range of responsibilities.
Absolutely. So the F-18 multi-role fighter, our biggest job, our number one job is defending Canada, obviously. How we do that is through NORAD. So we defend Canada and North America together through the NORAD umbrella, so the North American Aerospace Defense. And every fighter base in Canada, so Cold Lake and Bagotville, has a quick reaction alert facility where we always have pilots and technicians and armed jets kind of ready for any eventuality, whether that be, foreign aircraft flying over our airspace, whether it be an airliner that's going through issues like a hijacking or radio failure or something like that. We're always ready to launch, in X number of minutes and ready to go, intercept whatever aircraft we need to and carry out the mission.
It's interesting that now we did an episode a few episodes back in September that listeners can check out on remembering 9/11. It's interesting that now that's part of NORAD's mission, where before it was completely focused on external threats, and now there's also that focus on potential threats from within.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say a much higher part of our focus as NORAD pilots is to intercept any airliner or civilian aircraft that's going through issues. So it's definitely after 9/11 has gotten a lot more focus, which is a good thing, obviously.
Yeah.
And then, so if we're not doing any NORAD operations, if we're not doing force generation activities at home, then, we go internationally for the most part to defend Canada's interests abroad. Since I've gotten to the squadron a few years ago, we haven't done any actual operations. So I've done a few international exercises, LFEs as we call them, so large force exercises, both in the US and overseas. I did one exercise called Frisian Flag in the Netherlands and another one called Cobra Warrior in the UK, which I just finished up. That was in September. So I just got back from that not long ago.
That must have been really cool to go to the Netherlands. And I think they fly, F-16s?
Yeah, Netherlands, they've almost fully transitioned from the F-16 Viper to the F-35 now. So,
oh, really?
Yeah,
okay, I didn't realize they were on that train.
They're ahead of us a little bit on that train.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about the training and upgrade process for the F-18 pilot. And if we could, let's start at when you leave Moose Jaw.
Sure. So if there's one thing you should know about being a fighter pilot is that the learning never stops. From phase 2 to phase 3 on the Harvard, you get your wings. You're starting to learn, basic formation flying, navigation skills. You move on to the Hawk, learn how to fly a jet, obviously. And then you move on to your fighter lead-in training, which, was on the Hawk and F-419 in Cold Lake. Now is mostly done through NJEP. And I think some pilots are now starting to go through Italy and Finland for fighter leading training. So that's where you're going to start, focusing less about flying a jet and more how you're employing the jet as a weapon system. So you're learning, a lot of air-to-air tactics, air-to-ground deliveries, things like that. And then you move on finally to the F-18. And once again, the fighter pilot course, given F-410 in Cold Lake, it's a pretty quick transition to learn how to fly the F-18, like doing the basic handling of the aircraft, instrument flying, all that. It's only a few weeks. And then we move right into the tactics. The fighter pilot course it's about a year long.
Okay.
And we're going to go through everything from air-to-air employment, air-to-ground employment. The F-18 is the first jet you get to that has a radar, that has, a multitude of sensors. So you're really learning to be more of a sensor / weapon system operator than a pilot, I'd say. The flying is like second nature, and then you're employing the system itself a lot more.
I was going to say, it's telling that the course is a year long, but the portion where you learn to fly and fight the F-18 is only a few weeks long. And then basically the rest of that must be tactics, learning how to operate those sensors and systems and how to employ weapons.
Exactly. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's your 5th or 6th flight on the F-18 that you go solo. So it's
really,
they give you the keys to a jet and,
how's the pressure on that one?
It's huge. Yeah, it's kind of surreal, honestly. And after the fact, looking back, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they let me do that. But yeah, so then when you finally finish the fighter pilot course, FPC at 410 Squadron in Cold Lake, you get to the squadron and you think you're done training. It's like, nope, you're right into your combat ready upgrade, we call it. So it's about another 6 months to a year of building up your skills as a wingman to be combat ready, to be able to be deployed and whatnot on operations. Part of that is your NORAD checkout, where they check you out and for the QRA activities, so any NORAD intercepts and whatnot. Part of the combat ready upgrade as well is your night vision qualification. So we start flying on NVGs in the Hornet. And then you keep moving on from there as a fighter pilot throughout your career. You go from combat ready upgrade to element lead upgrade, where you can be formation lead of 2 aircraft, and then section lead upgrade, you're a lead of 4 aircraft. You move on to IPUG, we call it, so an instructor pilot upgrade, where you can now teach the young guys through their upgrades. You can do your mission commander qual, so you're always pretty much on upgrade or moving towards your next upgrade as a fighter pilot.
So the learning just never stops.
It really never does, yeah.
It sounds intense, but it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's challenging for sure, and you're always in the books, obviously. So
yeah, I think that's such an important thing to highlight to any young pilots listening. It's just that realization that you really don't stop studying. Like, if you're looking for an easy career, this is definitely not that. I always think about how, with the amount of studying you do as a pilot in the Air Force, especially in like the heavily tactically involved communities. I mean, you could be a doctor or something, because you're going to spend years in training and then years more in training on the squadron, and the studying just never stops.
Yeah, exactly. I like your point about comparing it to a doctor, because let's say for me, I joined the military at 16, joined as a pilot as 18. I'm 27 now, and I'm just getting onto the Hornet, just starting my career, as a fighter pilot. And I still got so much more to go, right? It's a lifelong learning curve, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. So now that we've talked a little bit about the training and upgrade process, can you take us through what a normal day looks like at 433 Squadron? And because obviously no 2 days are alike, we'll say like an average flying day and an average day where you're not flying.
Sure, yeah. So average flying day, like you mentioned, we're probably either in the QRA doing a shift there, or if we're not, on operations somewhere. A normal flying day would consist of us showing up to work in the morning. Depends if you're a morning wave or an afternoon wave scheduled. But you show up sometimes as early as 6:30, 7 a.m. Start studying a little bit, top off your studying that you haven't really caught up as much on as you would have liked to. And then you go right into the mission planning aspect. So looking at the weather, we do a lot of, mission planning on a small mission data card that we carry to the jet.
Would that be like one that you put all your navigational info in and those sorts of things that you plug in?
Yeah, exactly. Waypoints, weapon parameters, things like that.
Okay.
For the mission you're about to do. And then once you're ready, we always do a lengthy brief before the flight. We'll do the brief with the instructor pilot that's flying with us, or just the formation lead if we're doing a non-upgrade mission. The brief lasts, about an hour and a half.
Okay.
And then we start getting ready to actually get to the jet. So for us in the Hornet, we wear a lot of all-sea gear. So a lot of our, we wear G-pants, our harness, our life vest, as well as our helmet.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to go downstairs, start putting that on. Ideally, especially if you're doing a higher G mission, you want to start stretching as well. Stretch your neck, stretch your back, or else that's when injuries start kind of coming in.
That's an important point, how physical it is to fly a fighter.
Yeah, very physical. Like, just from the moment you start putting on your gear, walking out to the jet, strapping in, and the flight itself, like it's pretty tiring, actually. You come back from a flight and you're exhausted mentally, but also pretty physically as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so from when we start getting dressed to the jet, we're going to go out to our step desk, as we call it. We're going to have a pilot that will give us an out brief. He'll give us the latest weather or anything we need to know pretty much before we take off. When we go out to the jet, we'll start the jet, and there's no hiding that the jets are getting a bit older. So sometimes we have to do quite a bit of troubleshooting to make sure that it's good to go.
Mm-hmm.
It can be anything from the flight control systems to our radar. Sometimes they just need a couple on and offs, like an old computer, if you will.
But also, like you said, they are aging aircraft, but there's also a ton of systems on board.
Yeah.
I always try to highlight this when we talk about how an aircraft might come up unserviceable, as we say. There's so much on board there's like so many computers, so many systems. It can be the smallest thing, but you're not going to take off without everything functioning properly.
Exactly. And then, especially if it's a critical mission, if we're in the QRA, there's so many things that we have to make sure that are good to go before we take off. So after that, we take off. We only fly, depending on the mission, between an hour and a half if we don't have an air-to-air refueler. Obviously, with an air-to-air refueler, we can fly as long as we want, if you will, as long as the tanker sticks around. And then after our hour and a half, we're going to come back, we're going to land, and then we start getting to the process of debriefing. So we'll look at everything that happened during the flight. If we employed any simulated weapons, we'll look at those parameters, make sure everything was correct. And then we're going to sit in the debrief, and it's really like, just we're looking at our HUD tapes. We're looking at everything from the flight, kind of moment by moment, and going through what went well, what went wrong, and then what are the big key, we call it DFP, so debrief focus points. What are the big things that we can take away from this flight?
Can you explain what a HUD tape is?
Sure, yeah. So HUD stands for heads up display. So that's obviously the flight instrument, the glass pane in front of our eyes there that gives us all our flight information and weapon symbology as well in the F-18. And then tapes, it's just short for, like an old recorder. So in the Hornet and for pretty much every fighter jet out there, there's a system, a camera that will be recording your HUD.
And for the listeners, a HUD is a heads-up display. It's basically a screen that the pilots look through that shows all their applicable flight data and systems information.
So that you can, like, again, debrief for your missions, and if there's anything like for combat operations, you can look back on making sure everything went well, and if you need to look at anything in particular, you can stop at an exact time, a space and time, and look at exactly what happened.
Okay. And how long are those debriefs typically?
It varies depending on how complex the mission was.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's minimum an hour.
Okay.
And then I've seen debriefs go up to, especially for like an LFE or things like that, like we're talking like 3 to 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It is, yeah. You need a couple coffee breaks in there.
So that covers a flying day. What does a non-flying day look like?
Sure. So non-flying day, that's when we really try to use that time that we don't usually have on a flying day to do a lot of our admin. So let's say we have some paperwork to do, some claims to put in, things like that. That takes up a small portion of your day. And if not, we're also studying. We're getting ready for the next exercise, for the next thing that's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so even if you're not flying, you're always doing something at the squadron. There's pretty much no dead times. You're always working. And then if you got nothing else to do, you kind of go around and try to help your buddies if they have something that they need to get done. So yeah, it never stops.
Yeah, I found in the Aurora world that if you ever find yourself without work, you're missing something.
Yeah.
Like there's something that's creeping up on you that you're not getting ready for.
Exactly.
You mentioned air-to-air refueling. What's it like to go up to a tanker and get some gas? What's that like?
Yeah, so like anything in life, the first time you do it, you're like, what am I doing? I should not be this close to a big airplane like that.
Yeah.
But once you've done it a few times, like I'd say 5 to 6 pokes, as we call them. So 5 to 6 attempts at connecting to the tanker, it kind of becomes second nature.
Mm-hmm.
You learn your sight pictures and your references off the airplane you're fueling off of. And it's really cool, and it's a really good force enabler for, again, taking on longer missions and doing more stuff. Like any of the large force exercise missions that we do, if the tankers aren't there, like we can't get the mission done.
Mm-hmm.
So they're super important for us. The Hornet doesn't carry a lot of internal gas, and we burn it pretty quick. But yeah, and then I've tanked from anywhere from the C-130H as a tanker. I've tanked off the Polaris, the CC-150. I've tanked on the KC-46. I've tanked on the KC-135, which we call it the Iron Maiden.
That's getting old now.
It's getting old, and it's quite something to tank off that thing.
It's huge, right? That's a strato tanker?
Yeah, it's KC-135. And the system it has on it, so it's an American jet, obviously, and it's meant for boom operations for like Vipers and F-15s, but they have a boom drogue adapter, we call it, for the F-18. And it is sporty, man, trying to get on that thing and stay on it for fuel. So it's a 100%, 110% focus while you're fueling off that thing.
Yeah.
And then also when I was in England, we tanked off the they call it the KC-30 Voyager, but it's an A330 Airbus.
Okay.
So yeah, wide range of airplanes that can tank us. And once you learn how to tank on one, there's small differences for the other jets, but it's all pretty similar.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. When you arrived on squadron, what did you find was the hardest part of the job when you started?
Yeah, so I think the biggest realization for me was, having gone through all the training from Moose Jaw to NJEP to Cold Lake, I thought that when I was going to become a fighter pilot, things would kind of maybe slow down a little bit, or I'd have maybe a bit more time to chill out, be at home and things like that.
Like, I made it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can kind of take a break now, but it's quite the opposite. You show up to the squadron, it's like, all right, combat ready upgrade, NORAD checkout so that you can be in the QRA, night vision qualification. Oh, here's a secondary duty. So, the work never stops coming.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the biggest part was trying to find a good work-life balance that worked for me and worked for also my fiance, that's at home. So that was the bigger realization for me when I got to squadron.
Yeah. And how did you take that challenge on? How did you overcome that?
Yeah, so like I said, kind of just setting boundaries. Like by this time, I might not be done completely my work, but I'm gonna get back home, go spend some time with my fiance, and also I really emphasize taking time in my day to go to the gym.
Yep.
Go do some other activities. You need hobbies. Like you need something else outside of work to keep you going and keep you passionate about.
Yeah, 100%.
And I listened to your podcast with Rich last week talking about sleep. Sleep is also super important. Like if you're not rested, like you're gonna show up dragging your feet and not doing the best work you can.
Yeah.
So I'd say the best things you can do for yourself are find a good work-life balance, have hobbies outside of work that you enjoy doing, and go to the gym, sleep well.
I think that's great advice because especially when you first get on squadron, that's going to be pretty relatable for most people, that there is going to be an avalanche of stuff that's going to hit you that you need to know. And you're going to feel like you needed to know it yesterday, but there's not enough hours in the day to do all that. And you have to have some point where you say, okay, I'm done now. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to spend some time with my family. I'm going to do whatever it is that helps refresh me.
Exactly. And like, unfortunately, we have a bit of a personnel shortage issue in the Canadian Armed Forces. So there's less people. There's still a lot of work to do. So sometimes you feel like you have to take on more of the work that's not being, taken up by other people that would be there. Mm-hmm. So once again, you just have to find that balance that works for you, that works for your family, and just try not to burden yourself out in the first year, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So we've talked about that life can be pretty intense on the F-18. How much are you away flying the F-18?
Sure. So even when I'm at home doing domestic operations, we spend quite a bit of time in the QRA, like I said, where we're not sleeping at home. We're 24/7 at work in the facilities, ready for any eventuality. So even if we're at home, for me in Bagotville, spending quite a few nights away from home, away from my fiance and my dogs, and that's just the normal part of the job. Mm-hmm. And if we're not doing that, we're often, by often I mean twice a year, usually gone on exercises or deployments down south to the States, to Europe. That's on top of any courses that you would do, like any professional development courses. So you're definitely, we're not as gone as often as a community like the C-17 or the Polaris, where those guys are just all over the place all the time.
Yeah.
But we are still gone from home quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So a question I've had from quite a few listeners is, what happens if you have to go to the bathroom when you're flying the F-18?
Yeah. So I will speak for the male side of the house.
Yeah, that's fair.
We have a few female fighter pilots, which is awesome. So for us, for the guys, the dudes, we have little pee bags that we can pee into. It is extremely difficult and challenging,
no,
especially depending on the mission phase you're in. So it's usually a good idea to try to get that out before you go flying, or even if you're like in the chocks in the airplane on the ground with a parking brake set. Yeah, that's a good time to take a pee before you go. Because we wear a lot of, we wear a flight suit, and on top of the flight suit, we have all our survival equipment, our G pants and everything. Yeah, so you have to kind of bring your seat up, find a comfortable position, be able to take the pee bag and be able to use it. So the pee bag usually there's either a sponge or some sort of powder that will absorb your pee. Yeah. But I've had one or two leak on me.
Yeah, which, no doubt.
Oh my God, that is not a good feeling. Why is it wet? Oh, it's leaking.
Yeah.
But yeah, so definitely another thing that we really try to do to avoid using those pee bags is we call it tactical dehydration. So let's say I know I'm going to cross the Atlantic Ocean for 6 hours. I'm going to try to like get really hydrated the day before. Mm-hmm. And then that morning, a little bit of a coffee, maybe go to the bathroom for one last time. And then the rest of the flight, you're not drinking any water, just to make sure that you don't have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. How is it crossing the Atlantic solo? That must be really difficult for 6-7 hours by yourself in a cockpit.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you have a question coming up where you're going to ask me the most challenging flight in an F-18.
Okay.
I would say this isn't the most challenging, but it's the most uncomfortable, really.
Yeah.
So I've crossed the Atlantic Ocean twice now in the F-18. Once coming back from the Netherlands, and then once going to Europe to England for Cobra Warrior. On top of your flight suit, on top of your normal all-sea equipment, we have to wear an immersion suit, which we commonly call a poopy suit.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a big dry suit that you have to wear underneath all your equipment, just in case that we ever had to eject in the North Atlantic. You'd be able to survive a bit longer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're 6 or 7 hours in a cramped cockpit, wearing your helmet, your immersion suit, all your other equipment. and there's no room to go to the bathroom to stretch your legs. They give us a bit of food to try to kind of keep us going for the flight. So like a bit of orange juice, like some beef jerky, some protein bars, things like that. But after 3 or 4 hours, you really start wishing you're on the ground on the other side of the Atlantic there, taking a stretch. So
yeah, I've done a mission in the Aurora that we call a duck butt, which is, for the listeners, is when a tanker and an Aurora escort F-18s across the Atlantic so that if there is any issues, we can be on scene right away to help them with anything that may happen. And one thing I heard on the frequency that we were all monitoring was the fighters doing trivia with each other. So is that something that you always do when you do a crossing? Is it someone's responsibility to get like the trivia questions? Or?
Yeah, we try to find ways to keep busy. So obviously we have our tanker frequency where we'll be talking to the tanker commander, because one thing I must say is that we never cross the ocean alone. We always, like you said, have our tanker that's giving us the gas to get across, and then we'll have an Aurora or a C-130H that's providing our duck butt. So crossing the ocean is not something that you can do alone in a Hornet. You need a big team of people to get you across. But that being said, we try to keep busy. On the inner flight, we'll be cracking jokes, trying to pass the time. And I've never done trivia flying somewhere, but we have done. We called it a bingo, where we'd had a bingo card with a bunch of different items on the ground, and then we were all flying with our cameras, our sniper pods, and then
cool.
You had to fill out the bingo cards by, let's say there was you need to find a boat crossing a river, so you're flying over over Labrador or something, you're trying to find a boat crossing a river. Then once you find that, okay, you have to record it through your system, and then you can knock that out. And then it was pretty cool. It was a good way to pass the time.
I like that. It's a little bit of training using your systems and
stuff.
Exactly. And you're having some fun and keeping busy.
Exactly. You got to keep your mind busy, or else you're gonna start hating the crossing.
Yeah, I definitely, when I was doing those missions, did not envy you folks, as I was walking around and using the bathroom and going back to the galley to get a bite to eat
and drinking coffee.
Yeah, for sure. I would find that very difficult. So kudos to you folks. We've touched on this a little bit, but how physically demanding is flying the F-18? And do you folks find that it has any lasting effects on your body?
Yeah, so flying the F-18, definitely very physically demanding, like we've already touched on. For me, I'll speak like from personal experience. I had just shown up to the squadron, not very long, probably 6 months to a year in my first tour on the squadron. When I was flying higher G missions, mostly basic fighter maneuvers, BFM or ACM, air combat maneuvers, where you're looking around a bunch with your helmet, with your head. You're pulling a lot of G, looking backwards. Started feeling a little bit of a pinch between my shoulder blades. So, I started doing a bit more stretching, try to maybe get that to go away. It's kind of stuck around. So I started going to the physio on base to see if she could help out with that pain that I was experiencing. And then after a few weeks of physio, the physiotherapist said, well, I'm not too sure what's going on. Let's send you to get an MRI to make sure everything's good, and I can pinpoint what the issue is so that we can fix it, right? So I go and get the MRI. Comes back that I have a herniated disc in my neck, C6, C7, which is like pushing the hernia itself, like the disc is pushing against a nerve. So that was the kind of the pain I was feeling. So that just goes to show, I'm a pretty young guy, fresh off of training on the F-18. And already getting some effects from flying the F-18. So it just goes to show how physically demanding it can be.
Yeah, and especially like listeners won't know this, but you're quite a fit guy. Like it's not like you don't go to the gym, or you got a big, thick, strong neck and a strong back and all that stuff. Like you're taking care of yourself, and it can still happen.
Exactly. And I've had a lot of time to think about maybe what's causing that and things that could help maybe in the future. It's no secret that the F-18 ALCE is also aging. It's a bit older.
For the listeners, we've mentioned the term ALCE a few times now. That's Aviation Life Support Equipment. For fighter pilots, this includes things like helmets, oxygen masks, inflatable life rafts and vests, harnesses, flares, radios, and signaling devices for post-evacuation survival.
It kind of gives us a hunched forward position in the seat, kind of a bad posture to start with. Compound that with, the weight of our helmet, with the G forces on top of that, we're pulling up to 7.5 Gs. So your neck is experiencing like a few hundred pounds of
that's
force,
crazy.
Which your neck is not designed for, obviously.
Yeah.
So ways to mitigate that going forward. I'm still, doing a lot of physio, a lot of chiro. And then I've been also working with my physiotherapist to get it looks silly, but it's called an iron neck. It's like a neck strengthening device. So I've been trying to implement that more at the squadron, because I'm not the first guy to have neck issues. I had a good friend of mine not too long ago have to stop flying the F-18 because of neck issues. So it's definitely something that we're dealing with and something that we have to really keep on top of. I look at it, let's try to be preventive instead of reactive, to injuries.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Where do you find pilots tend to struggle on the F-18?
Okay, so initially, what I struggle with and what every fighter pilot struggles with initially, and we've already touched on this a little bit, is that you're now using the F-18, an airplane, as a weapon system.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest kind of mind shift is going from just flying an airplane, focusing on flying the airplane, taking off, landing, all that jazz. But now you're doing it always with another jet or another 3 jets. So a formation of 2, formation of 4. And on top of that, you're employing all the tactics that you have to know while also employing all the sensors you have on board. So
it sounds like a lot.
Yeah. So going through, and the F-18 is the only tactical single seat airplane in the Canadian Armed Forces, right? We're always alone in the cockpit.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a lot to deal with at the same time. So what a lot of guys, myself included, struggle with when we first started the training. Yeah, we have a kind of a little riddle that we remember what our priorities are as fighter pilots. As a wingman, the first one is formation. Second one is sensors. Third one is comm. So formation is always the number one priority. Like if you as a wingman stay with your flight lead, you're going to be safe. He's going to keep you safe.
Yep.
Or he should, theoretically. Second priority becomes sensors. So operating your sensors, operating your radar, operating your sniper pod, anything else, your dispenser system, that becomes the second priority. And the third priority is comm. We have a lot of tactical brevity communications that we have to use when we're talking to our ground controllers, when we're talking to other formation members.
Mm-hmm.
So the hardest thing initially is trying to learn how to work your sensor. I'm going to use the radar here because it's our biggest sensor we use in the Hornet, while also effectively maintaining formation off your flight lead and communicating at the same time. So you're doing 6 things at once, but you have to prioritize those in the right order.
So it's kind of similar to pilots who've trained in the Canadian Armed Forces will know the saying aviate, navigate, communicate, except because you're in a formation, you don't need to worry about the navigate piece. So it's more like aviate, operate, communicate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then operate is all the sensors, because, your Aurora guys, you have the sensor operators in the back that could help you, but on the Hornet, you're alone. So you have to, not only do you have to fly off your formation lead, and then you have to operate your sensors effectively to detect and kill the enemy.
Yeah. So I usually ask, how can they overcome this? But I think you've kind of answered that with your list of priorities.
Yeah, exactly. You overcome that by prioritizing the proper things at the proper times, but also how do you help yourself on the ground? Do a lot of chair flying, obviously, like any pilot will tell you going through the training. And we have simulators at Baggaville and at Cold Lake that we can use when it's available, when it's not being used by another formation, by a trip. We can get in the sim and we can really practice on that. And it's a really, really good tool for us.
Yeah. Is that full motion and all the whole 9 yards?
It's not full motion, but it's like 360 view, and the cockpit is 100% the same as the jet.
So very high fidelity. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the F-18 is one of the few aircraft we have that carry munitions. What is it like to drop or fire munitions? Is it exciting, or does it just become part of the job?
Yeah, exactly. So on the F-18, we have numerous weapons, both air-to-air and air-to-ground. Air-to-ground, we have the gun in the front. We have our 20 Mike gun. We have our bombs for air-to-ground delivery. So we have laser-guided bombs, we have GPS-guided bombs, or a combination thereof. And then for air-to-air, we have our missiles that we can use, like Sidewinder and whatnot, for any air-to-air engagement. So we have quite a few weapons that we have to know how to use. And then when you first use them, for example, the first time I fired the gun, or the first time I dropped a live weapon, was incredible. It was can't believe it. Once again, I can't believe I'm doing this for real.
Yeah, what a rush.
Yeah, so the first time you do it, it's a huge rush, but obviously you still want to make sure that you're doing it properly.
Yeah.
And then once kind of you've done it a few times, like the novelty wears off, like anything in life, but you really become hyper focused on releasing safely and properly, and just we want to make sure that we're dropping on our weapon at the right spot at the right time, that we don't have any collateral damage. So that's really what your focus is on, is like, I don't want to have to hurt anyone that I don't have to, kind of thing,
Yeah, it's a huge responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah. And then so once the novelty has worn off of employing live weapons, it becomes a lot more like I just want to make sure that when I release this weapon, it's going to the right spot.
Yeah, just being as precise and professional as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes sense. So this might be a silly question, but what's it like the first time you break the sound barrier?
Yeah, so unfortunately, very underwhelming. Yeah, I'm really sorry to break it to you. So I've done it. The first time I broke the sound barrier was on the T-38 Talon. It is a supersonic trainer.
Okay.
It was a bit more pronounced than the Talon because it's a smaller airplane. So once we hit that sound barrier, the speed of sound Mach 1, not right away, but a bit later, you had kind of a little bump that you could feel.
Okay.
But if not, like, for example, breaking the sound barrier in the F-18, the only reason you know you're going supersonic is by looking at your HUD and the jet telling you that you're over Mach 1.
Okay.
They're from inside the cockpit. There's no sound difference. There's no vibrations. There's nothing really.
Okay.
And I've honestly never heard a shockwave from the ground. So
no.
Yeah, and we can't hear it obviously in the jets. So.
No, of course, because you're going faster than it.
Yeah, so unfortunately, very underwhelming.
Okay.
But it is pretty cool when you're flying tactically and then you look down like, oh, I'm going supersonic, cool,
Yeah.
and then you just move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember even in the Harvard when you started having a speed that could be measured in Mach, you're like, I'm going Mach something. Yeah. That's kind of cool. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Well, very. It's a cool concept.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you've talked about LFE or large force exercises.
Yeah.
Those would involve dogfighting friendly nations, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Which country do you find has the most difficult opponents?
So anytime we do any training with our partners, we're pretty much always training with NATO partners.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll talk to you when we went to the Netherlands on Frisian Flag or when we went to the UK with Cobra Warrior. A lot of times when we train, our partner countries, our NATO partners they're going to be threat replicating an enemy threat. So they'll fly not the way they usually would, just to replicate, flying as an enemy.
Right, because their aircraft would have different capabilities and different tactics.
But sometimes just for our own proficiency, we'll go like one-on-one for any, we call it within visual range engagements with other fighters. So for example, when I was in the UK, I went and did air combat maneuvering, which is 2 versus 1 dogfighting with a Eurofighter Typhoon out of Lossiemouth. So
yep,
that's pretty cool. We're over in the North Sea and it's me and my flight lead, 2 Hornets, and we have the Eurofighter behind us who's playing the enemy, if you will. And it's like 3, 2, 1 fights on kind of thing. And I can't really say that any one NATO country is better than the other because we're all trained the same way. So it really, has a more or a greater impact on the fight is the capabilities of the aircraft.
Yeah.
If you're dogfighting a Eurofighter Typhoon, which has like pretty good thrust to weight ratio, like it's going to be better than you in certain ways. But once again, like the Hornet, if we get slow and we get into what we call our one circle fight, where imagine like you're doing a knife fight inside of like a telephone booth, like that's where the Hornet really excels at. And so you want to try to get your enemy to follow you into your favorite fight so that you can defeat him.
Yeah, that makes sense. On that same note, you mentioned that the capabilities of the aircraft are important in those exercises. We're still using older 4th generation fighters. Do you find that our training and competency can help overcome newer tech, or is it pretty difficult?
Yeah, so one thing that I've found that I've been really proud of is anytime like us Canadians show up with the F-18, like yes, it is a bit of an older jet. It's a 4th generation fighter. We're flying with like 4th and a half gen or 5th gen fighters out there. And we just have to be upfront with what our capabilities are. But whatever is given to us in the mission, we do it really well. And it's really cool to see partner nations like, working with the Americans and the Brits. They see us Canadians like, oh, you guys, like, you're doing pretty good with what you have. And that's kind of our pride and joy is being able to still, with the equipment that we have, go out and give our very best and still like play a pretty big part in the overall mission.
That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
So how do you think our training will change at the tactical level when we upgrade from 4th gen to 5th gen fighters? Is that going to be like a huge shift in tactics and how we do business?
Yeah. So like you said, it'll be a very, very big shift, a mindset shift. And the biggest one is to do with security. The 4th gen fighters, we can take the F-18 on the road, do it cross country. We can do all the tactics that we train to in the jet itself, in our airspace. The big paradigm shift going to the F-35 and to any 5th gen fighter is that a lot of the tactics that they use are super sensitive and they can't be replicated in the air because of security threats that would be maybe watching those things to get more information. So the big shift is that, for example, going to the F-35, a lot more of our tactical missions will be flown in the simulator. We'll still do stuff in the airplane, but up to a certain level. Everything else will be done in the simulator. So definitely a lot more time spent in the sim for 5th generation fighters. but obviously guys are still meeting their minimum number of hours every year in the jet.
Yeah, so that'll be one of the biggest changes. It's just the mindset on how we train and where we train.
Exactly, yeah. So it'll be just a big shift. With the F-35, we won't be able to really take the jet on the road per se. We won't be able to do a lot of the things that we can enjoy doing with the F-18. So it'll definitely just be a mind shift that we'll have to get used to.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're seeing kind of across many air forces, though, is this push for higher levels of simulation, obviously because of cost savings, but also because you can have a higher fidelity. We're getting to a point where simulators are getting very good, and you can have that higher mission fidelity where you can actually go and do the business versus just simulating it somewhere where there's artificial constraints that get put on the mission.
Yeah, exactly. And, for example, in the F-18, there's some stuff that we just don't do in the airplane because it would be negative training for us to do so. It's better to just go in the simulator and replicate through the simulator any of the threats that we're going up against. It's better for us that way than actually going to the jet and trying to replicate something that doesn't really work.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's the best day you've ever had in an F-18?
Best day that I've ever had in an F-18, I'd have to say it was not too long ago, this past September at Exercise Cobra Warrior in the UK. It was me and my good friend, who's now also my brother-in-law. We were both in the same formation. He was my element lead. I was his wingman. And we're going to execute some dynamic targeting. So we're pretty much just flying around, refueling, waiting for the higher level operations to give us a dynamic task, so a target to go drop weapons on. So him and I are just, first time flying together overseas in a large force exercise. And we get given this, this dynamic tasking. All right, you have to go drop weapons, this number of weapons on this target. The target just so happened to be in Scotland. So we're flying over the North Sea. So him and I get ready. We do our fighter-to-fighter brief to go drop. And it was just so cool just being with an old friend that I did all my pilot training with, who's also family now. And going and doing the business, as we say, doing the mission, dropping our simulated weapons in Scotland, turning back around and just coming back just feeling like absolute heroes, even if we were only a very, very small part of the entire mission. It was that was pretty cool.
That is really cool, though. You work for so many years, and then you sometimes get these opportunities where you're there with a friend who you've worked through it all with too, and you're like, here we are, we're actually out here doing what we trained to do, and how cool is this?
Yeah. And then he did an incredible job as a flight lead. We did pretty well as a formation, not just the two of us, but there was 4 of us total. So it was just a really cool moment. Hey, we had fun, but we also did pretty good out there. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
What's the hardest day you've ever had in an F-18?
Yeah, so hardest day, I talked about it earlier, but I wouldn't say there's been one really, really difficult day, but very uncomfortable would be crossing the Atlantic or any prolonged flight in the F-18. After a couple hours, you just need to get some blood flow going. You need to get out and stretch your legs, and you can't always do that. So definitely the most challenging or the most uncomfortable flights are those long transits, long cross countries.
Yeah, that's fair. I heard you recently had a memorable flight on your personal airplane. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So my father and I, a few years ago, we bought an airplane together, a small, a Stinson 188-2. So it's an airplane, a tail dragger airplane.
It's so beautiful.
Tube and fabric. It's like an old retro car, right? And it was built in 1947. Obviously, it's been fully restored since then a few times. So yeah, we bought that thing together. We've been maintaining it ourselves for a few years now. So we put the aircraft from a certified category to owner maintenance. And ever since we bought the airplane, we were buying the airplane from an older gentleman that hadn't flown it in a few years. So the airplane just needed a bit of tweaking and troubleshooting. Just to, for example, for the engine, it's an older engine as well, just to make sure that everything was running smoothly. So we've had little things here and there with the engine, but nothing major at all. So yeah, this happened this past summer. It was in early June. It was the first time we took the airplane out for a flight in the summer. So, we opened up the hangar doors, and it was myself and my fiance. We got in the plane. All we were intending to do was just a nice little familiar flight around the area just for fun. Do about an hour in the local area, just look at the sights. We only fly about 100 knots in that thing, so it's just fun sometimes. It's kind of like a motorcycle ride. Just go out, right, and just explore.
You don't have to have a reason. Just go for a flight.
Yeah, it's cool sometimes to just go flying for the sake of it, right?
Yep.
So we take off, and about 10 to 15 minutes into our flight, we're heading over the Saguenay River towards Bagotville. And we took off from a small airport called Saint-Honoré, which is to the north of Bagotville. And then I start feeling a slight change in vibration from my engine, slight change in sound. And I just noticed a change in power output, if you will, from the engine. So I start looking at my instruments, and then we have one gauge on the airplane that is an EGT, so exhaust gas temperature gauge. And I start looking at we have 6 cylinders, so I start looking at every cylinder. And then I get to number 4, and I see that cylinder number 4 is a few hundred degrees colder. So I'm like, okay, it's not firing anymore. But usually it's just like a spark plug that's not firing anymore, or it can be something very, very benign and very basic. So I just look at my fiance. I said, hey babe, like, yeah, number 4 is not firing anymore. The cylinder, it's probably just a spark plug. We're just going to turn back around and go land, because you don't want to purposely fly, especially an older engine like that on 5 cylinders just for fun, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I turned back around, started heading back towards Saint-Honoré, the airport where we're based at. And about 2 to 3 minutes after that, I'm approximately 10 miles from the airfield. All of a sudden, we're about at 2,000 feet AGL at this point, so above ground level. And the engine just starts making this absolutely horrible sound, like bang, bang, bang. Huge vibrations, huge loss of power.
Yeah.
And then, like any pilot will tell you in an emergency situation, it just took me a few seconds to be like, what the heck is going on? Like, is this happening for real, kind of thing?
Yeah.
And then I start trying to troubleshoot, operating the different, the mixture level, like the different magnetos, switching fuel tanks. I'm trying everything just to see what, trying to find what's going on. At the same time, I look at my fiance and I said, babe, like, this is not good. Start looking for a field. My fiance is a nurse, so she stayed, like, I was really surprised. She was like super calm. Like, she was like, okay, yeah, no problem. You're doing great, Fred. Like, keep doing it. And I'm like, wow. Like,
no pressure.
Yeah, you're way too calm for me right now. So she starts looking for a field. I declare an emergency with the airport. So, Saint-Honoré Tower, Mayday, Mike Golf Hotel, 10 miles east. We're having an engine issues, engine vibrations, looking to come back, runway 36, which was like the runway pretty much right on my nose. So ATC, they copy the emergency. They say, Mike Golf Hotel, like, airport is yours. You're number 1. Runway, your choice. Do you require any further assistance? So as he's telling me this, I'm still flying the airplane, obviously, right? Aviate, navigate, communicate. And the engine is just not producing any power anymore. I'm having to trade altitude for airspeed to keep the airplane flying. And it's pretty evident to me, like, in the windshield, that the runway is getting further and further up on my windshield. I'm like, it's 7 miles ahead of me. I'm not going to make this.
Yeah.
So at that moment, after ATC tells me that, I reply, Mike Golf Hotel, unable. We're landing on the highway. We're landing on the highway between Chicoutimi and Tadoussac, we had just flown over a highway, a road. And as my girlfriend was calling out fields, to the right of us, I was looking at them and they looked too short. They looked kind of steep. And, you can't verify the condition of a field. It might be pretty wet and you could just dig right into the soil, right? So in that moment, I made the decision that we had just flown over a highway and that I was going to be putting the airplane down on the highway. So landing on the highway. So I started kind of joining a left-hand downwind, if you will, for the road. There's about a mile stretch of highway. There's houses on either side. ATC, like, when I said that I'm landing on the highway, they're like, Roger, like, we're dispatching an emergency crews. There's not much more at that point they can do, right?
Yeah.
So I keep flying the airplane, join a left downwind for the road. And then my 2 big things here are, well, there's houses on either side, so there's going to be power lines. And also there's cars on the road, right? It's a highway. So as I'm making my downwind, I look to see, I'm trying to find a good moment where I can turn in for the final, where there's no cars that are incoming towards me. And then just my luck that day, there was some construction further up on the road where there was a very long portion of the road where there was no incoming car. So I'm like, perfect. This is the good moment to turn in. I turn in towards the road. And then as I turn on to final, I pass over this one last car, the Ford F-150 pickup truck. It's white. I'm looking at the guy in the eyes and he's probably looking back at me like, what the heck is going on, right?
Oh my gosh.
And then the last thing I have to look out for is all those power lines. And they're really hard to see because there's no like buoys on them or anything or high vis markers that I could see. So I get on final. I'm keeping my speed a bit higher so I can have more maneuverability from the airplane. I fly over one set of power lines thinking that those are the last ones. And then I look up and I see another set of power lines like kind of right on my nose. So I'd like do a little bit of a duck, if you will. I duck under the other set of power lines, a little bit of a bunt. And then I'm under all the power lines, land on the road, like a 3-point landing with the tail dragger on the road. And then, start using the brakes. And then I had about 20 miles an hour left on the airplane of energy, of kinetic energy. So I just looked up to the right and there was a nice little gravel driveway. And I said, well, that looks like a good place to park. So I just used my speed and kind of just turned into the parking lot. The engine like shut down. And then I look at my fiance and we both look at each other like, did that just really happen? You know, like, holy moly, we're lucky to be alive, right?
Dude, I'm like,
yeah,
fully clenched up
I
over
know.
here listening to this. This is crazy.
It happened very, very quickly. And then, so we get out of the airplane, you know, the adrenaline's like through the roof at this point. You're just like, wow, I can't believe this just happened. And then I'm looking at the cars, like expecting for a few cars or something to pull up to the airplane, but cars just kept driving on the road as if nothing had ever happened. And then finally, about 2 minutes later, some guy pulls up on a bicycle and he goes, was that on purpose? Like, why'd you guys land here? And I'm like, sir, like, I did not want to land here today. Like, we just had an engine failure. Can you please just call the police maybe and help us out? So as he goes off to call the police, I go to the engine. I open up the cowling for the engine, and as I open it, I see there's like just oil all over the place. So I knew at that moment that, okay, something actually did happen. And so turned out to be, just long story short, to finish the story, the intake valve on my number 4 cylinder, it came loose.
Okay.
We don't know why. You know, it's hard to kind of, because we're not technicians or anything like that. It's hard to know why, but the intake valve came loose, and those engines are known for doing this particular type of engine. The intake valve was drawn into the cylinder by the piston and then punched out through the cylinder. So there was a big hole in the cylinder.
Oh, wow.
So obviously the engine was not producing any power, and just, I lost all my oil in like a minute. So yeah.
So was that a big fix or not too bad?
Actually, we got really lucky. We have a really good friend of ours who has a bunch of parts for this airplane and is a real subject matter expert on these airplanes. And he had a cylinder waiting for us ready to use. So we were just able to change the piston, change the cylinder. And about a week later, my father took off from that same road with Transport Canada approval and the police blocking and everything. So fixed the plane on the side of the road and took back off a week later.
So do you guys feel good again flying it? No, like, did your fiance feel good getting in the plane still? Or
yeah, like right after it happened, she was a bit shaken up, like especially when the adrenaline started wearing down.
Yeah, for sure.
But again, really surprising. I'm really proud of her. She, a couple of weeks later, I said, I'm going flying. Do you want to come with me? Like, don't feel like you have to, not at all. Right after what happened, and she said, no, I'll come flying with you. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, she's a trooper.
What is the most fulfilling part of your job?
Most fulfilling part of my job, kind of as I'm walking towards the F-18, I've just done a bunch of mission planning and preparation for the flight where you're focused, right, on the mission. And as I'm walking to the F-18, it's kind of that moment like, wow, like this is pretty cool. I'm one of only few people in this entire country that, is given the keys to an F-18 to go fly, right? I'm super privileged to do that. And it was a dream come true. And every flight, I try to kind of pinch myself like, hey man, like you're flying an F-18 all alone. And like the government and your leaders and everyone else is trusting you to fly this thing. So It's pretty cool.
In 30 seconds or less, if I'm a pilot in training, why should I want to fly the F-18? What makes it unique and who would that appeal to?
Yeah, so the F-18, it's the only tactical single-seat aircraft in the Canadian Armed Forces. You're the only one flying the jet, right? And you're the mayor of Cockpit City. You get to make kind of your own decisions throughout the flight while still, flying formation off of your flight lead and still, being part of a larger team. So that's pretty cool. It's one of the only communities where pretty much everything you do is tactics, right? You're training for employing the F-18 as a weapon to help the guys on the ground, like the soldiers on the ground, or help like the bigger mission, right? So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds amazing. It sounds like a really cool experience. And I find it very interesting, the mix of like, you need to be independent. You need to be able to fly by yourself in an aircraft. It's the only, as you say, the only solo aircraft we have. Well, sorry, the only solo tactical aircraft we have. Yeah. But at the same time, you still need to be a team player. Like, you guys super emphasize teamwork.
Yeah, exactly. You're always flying with another formation member, if not more. So we're always working together during the brief, the mission planning, the debrief. We're always, you're flying your cockpit, but there's always someone else that's nearby you that you have to work with, right? You're never really working alone.
So we're down to our final 3 questions. We ask them to every guest on the show. What is the most important thing you do to keep yourself ready for your job?
Yeah, so most important for me, like work-life balance. Take the time to be at home. Leave work at work, right? Try not to bring anything home and spend some time with my dogs, my fiance. Spend a lot of time. I try to take at least an hour a day to go to the gym, stay active, stay fit. Especially as a fighter pilot, you want to make sure that you're fit to do the physically demanding tasks that requires. And like I said earlier, just have a hobby, have something that you enjoy doing outside of work that kind of gets your mind off of work, and just to get away from a little bit, recharge, and then come back even stronger to work.
Yeah, I like that. It's a good balanced answer. We've already talked about this a little bit, but it is crazy how all-encompassing it can become if you let it.
Exactly.
And it's so important not to let that happen.
I agree.
What do you think makes a good pilot?
Yeah, so what makes a good pilot? I kind of like we used to have a fighter weapons instructor course, which would be Canada's like Top Gun equivalent, if you will, for fighter pilots. And the three tenets that they follow is, be knowledgeable, be credible, and be approachable. So, I think that goes not only to fighter weapons instructors, not only to fighter pilots, but like any pilot or any leader really in the military. Like, be knowledgeable, just know your stuff. And even if you don't know like all the answers, you can always go back and look it up, right? Later on. That's why we train. That's why we fight. It's just come back and learn some lessons. Be credible, I like always act in the best interest of the team, and just keep the trust of your peers high, right? Just be the guy that everyone wants to go to war with, and that they can trust you no matter what. And then be approachable. Just always be, try to be as nice as possible. We all have our rough days and days where we just don't want to talk to anyone, right? But just try to be the guy that people aren't scared to go up to and ask questions or talk, or that's about it.
I like that. All right. For the final question, I want you to picture a new pilot. Let's say someone who's in their flight training right now in the RCAF. If you could give them one piece of advice, what would that be?
Yeah. So I'd say my one big piece of advice is, when we first joined the Air Force to become pilots, we see all the steps that we have to get through to finally get to our goal, right? And it can seem like a lot, like a mountain that you have to climb, right? All the upgrades, all the training phases and whatnot. So I'd say try to really take everything one flight at a time, one day at a time, and try to really enjoy that moment in that flight, because you're never going to get it back. And you might as well, if you're putting in all this effort and you're making all these sacrifices for something, at least just try to have fun. Take it in, be in the moment, and look at it day by day, flight by flight, and try not to look at the entire mountain ahead of you.
Yeah. It's so easy to lose sight of that, and to get focused on I got to get this done, I got to succeed, and to stop enjoying that you're flying aircraft that most pilots in Canada would do anything just to have a FMIL flight in.
Exactly. And then, one day I guess you're going to be a bit older and looking back at your young days and being like, oh, I miss those days, right? So
I already do.
Yeah, there you go. So try to, even if you're a young buck moving up the training system, just try to enjoy every flight.
All right, Fred, it's been so great to catch up again after all these years. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this interview. So thank you very much.
Brian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah.
All right, that wraps up our chat with Fred about the CF-188 Hornet and life in the fighter force. For our next episode, we'll be sitting down with Colonel Dan Coots, the current wing commander of 15 Wing Moose Jaw, to talk about his career flying the CH-146 Griffin, as well as his time currently as the wing commander. It was an interview I really enjoyed doing, and I highly suggest you check it out. Do you have any questions or comments about something you heard on the show? Would you or someone you know make a great guest, or do you have a great idea for a show? You can reach out to us at thepilotprojectpodcast@gmail.com or on all social media at @podpilotproject. We'd like to thank you for joining us in this new year and wish you a happy new year. And as always, ask for a strong start with your help with the big three. That's like and follow us on social media, share with your friends, and follow and rate us 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Keep the blue side up. See ya!
Engineer, shut down all 4. Shutting down all 4 engines.